Hi, y'all. Yesterday, September 10th, 2022, I met up with 10 friends and we went to the Chappell Hill, Texas airing of the quilt show. Some of the quilts were hung outside, like these, and some of them were inside buildings on tables or on the church pews. They were in two different churches and two different museums. Many of the quilts were antiques. Here's an example of some of the barn quilts that were there. Some of them were for sale and some of them were for display. The antique quilts, as you can see, were various different ones that were made from different types of material that they used way back when they were making their quilts. And here's some that were used with modern day newer fabric, the new quilting cotton fabric. And some of the quilts were for sale. We saw quilts that were pieced. Here's a quilt for Christmas. We saw quilts that were appliqued. We saw quilts that were hand sewn together and hand quilted, along with machine sewn and machine quilted. Just a beautiful day and beautiful quilts to see. This quilt I thought was really interesting, how little piecing that they did on it. And then this was a fun hexagon quilt. They had quilts from various holidays. There's Halloween quilts. There were Christmas quilts. And then there were quilts that were made for children, quilts that were made for adults, just a huge range of various types of quilts you could see. Here's a display that was in front of one of the boutiques. Lots of cute little shops in Chappell Hill. We definitely enjoyed visiting the shops and dining in one of their restaurants and going to the lavender farm. This is one of the shops that had some older quilts for sale. Here's the children's activity. They could color on those little paper quilt squares and they put them together and made a fun little paper quilt. It was super cute for the kids to do. This is one of my favorite flowers that I saw in front of the post office. And this was a display of some quilt blocks that were framed that were for sale. So they had a few different vendors there, along with the shops, along with the art gallery that they had with various artists there. Some of the shops had multiple vendors inside of them. This one just reminds me of sunflowers. I thought that was really cool. Some of the quilts were also tied, where you take the yarn and tie them together instead of sewing the sandwich together to make the quilt. Here's a beautiful embroidery quilt. They also had quilts in one of the churches that were all patriotic. They were not part of Quilts of Valor or any specific organization, but they did make these quilts and often donated them to different military veterans in the area. So this was a charity program that they did, made patriotic quilts and then donated them to the veterans. Many were in red and white and blue, and some even had a splash of yellow in them. And this featured quilts all in one of the churches that was there. You got to see two different churches with quilts in it. Chappell Hill, Texas is a very cute, small town that has maybe a dozen shops in it and several churches and a few restaurants, but just super cute small town. It's a great place to go spend a day and just relax and browse and see what they have to offer. These were more of the quilts that were in one of the churches. This one is super cheerful. Loved the flowers on it. And this was a cute quilt in that church. It's made to look like men's shirts and ties. I believe the fabric on it could have actually come from men's shirts, but the ties were not men's actual ties. They were made to look like a tie. Some were bright and colorful quilts, as you just saw, and some used more of a muted tone with their colors. Here's a fun Christmas one. And then some were just plain black and white and didn't have much color to them at all. This is the farmhouse, the farm girl quilt that a few friends and I are working on making that quilt. The beautiful churches. This one, I just love the stained glass windows, so had to take some pictures and share the stained glass windows. Another one made from hexagons. That one was all cross stitch, a cross stitch quilt. This one was very scrappy. You could tell it was an older quilt, probably 1930s, with the colors and the fabrics that they had in it. Some were just simple squares, but they still made a really pretty quilt. That was a bow tie quilt. This one was a simple square one, but you could tell was made a long time ago. Look at the beautiful embroidery on this one. Love the butterflies. Another old one. This quilt was a bright, really fun quilt that was all done by applique. We loved the 9-patch cornerstones that they used in this one. Just super bright and fun. So you had a big variety of quilts. Now this was a very old quilt. We got to meet the owner of it. It belonged to her grandmother and was 100 years old. The bridesmaid made it for her grandmother as a wedding gift. So some of the quilts, you got to read the little story behind them and where they came from. Love the tulips. And this is an example of how some of the quilts were just put on different tables and displayed that way versus hanging them up. This was I believe, just a one-day show. So they had to have things set up very fast and be able to take them down pretty fast as well. Wow, look at all those tiny squares in this quilt. And lots of pretty pastel colored flowers that were popular back in that era. Here's an example of how the room looks when you walked in with the quilts all over. And this was a really fun dress form that we saw. It was expandable and the antique sewing machine inside one of the museums. They had them hanging on the porches. Now this quilt was made by all of these ladies here, and it was made over the course of about 2 years. It's a tapestry art that depicts the town of Chappell Hill. It takes up 2 different walls in this museum. It was just stunning. The detail in the tapestry was amazing. So these ladies got together at this museum and they sat for over 2 years and worked on making the tapestry art of their town. If you look, there's a really fun little skunk families in a couple different places. The haystacks had such amazing detail to them. They worked super hard over the course of 2 years. And that's the end of the show. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Bye.